I bought the Hotspot. Well, I heard the Hotspot, which is a soundtrack from the movie The Hotspot with Don Johnson. But the soundtrack was Miles Davis, Taj Mahal, John Lee Hooker, and I don't know if you know Roy Rogers, the slide player, and people like that. And I heard that, and that blew my mind. And so I was already hip to Miles. So this is prior to playing with Miles. But I don't know, it was maybe around the same time. No, yeah, I already been playing. I already did the Miles thing. But when I heard that Hooker, John Lee Hooker, and Miles Davis, that blew my mind, and I just automatically turned on to John Lee Hooker, and so I just started listening to John Lee Hooker, nobody else, and then finally got around to Howlin' Wolf, and I didn't even really get to Muddy until probably 5 or 6 years later. I didn't care about nobody but John Lee Hooker. He was the guy for me.
Well, I was just a kid, growing up out in the country, and didn't really have nobody playing the blues around me. But I heard a tape of Muddy Waters when I was about 10. And, the people was out there partying on the road, and they had this pickup truck, and they were listening to some music, and I heard that, whoa, yeah, and I said, man, what is that? And the guitar, bow, down. And I went up in the, and looked at the tape case, and it was Muddy Waters. Don't ask me what these people were doing listening to it, but they was listening to Muddy Waters. And I looked at that tape case, and I was just like, man, I remember that moment. I was about probably 8 or 10 years old, and I was like, man, from then on, I said, who's this Muddy Waters? And I, got me a record, then I got a Howlin' Wolf, it just led from there. I kept, finding people they listened to, and, I started reading about it. What is Muddy Waters, and just loved it, man.
Well, my sister had she was kind of like a beatnik, and we grew up in San Francisco, and she had some blues records, and she was into that, just a lot of eclectic stuff. And she was about 6 years older than me. When I was 12, she gave me this album, The Genius Sings the Blues by Ray Charles, and I really, something about it really just spoke to this sort of this, I don't know, deeper part inside of me. And so I started checking out some more of her albums, and she had, I remember she had Blues from the Gutter by Champion Jack Dupree, and she had Found Love by Jimmy Reed, and that was the first harp I heard was on that Jimmy Reed album. And what else did she have? She had a Big Bill record. And so I just started, I don't know, I was always had a secret private life inside as a kid, and so I just got into that stuff.
I heard the black woman that worked for my mother back in the, well, it was 1954, and I was living in North Carolina, and Beulah Huggins was her name. This is back in the last days of segregation down south of the border. And she would sing snatches of what I years later came to understand was John Lee Hooker music. She'd go, oh, my baby don't allow me to stay out all night long. And that's boogie chillin'. But I didn't know that until many years later when I actually had a John Lee Hooker record for the first time. And it was on there, and bam, that's what Beulah was singing. And one bourbon, one scotch, and sometimes she'd improvise on it. She said, one bourbon, one scotch, one little bitty beer. And she was singing the blues as she would cook and clean and do all the stuff that back in the 1940s and 50s, black women still did in white middle-class houses in the South of the United States of America. And so I was affected most deeply first by the blues.